Thank you everyone for coming to our event tonight. We're joined this evening by Vibhuti Jain and Beatriz Williams. Celebrate the release of Vib's novel, Our Best Intentions. I'm Michael, event host with RJ Julia. After a brief introduction, we'll hear from our authors. We'll have time for a few questions from the audience. And we'll move back to the space across where we entered for a signing. I'm going to ask also to turn down the music. The background might be a little distracting, but we'll get to that. So Vibhuti Jain began her career as a corporate lawyer in New York City. She holds degrees from Yale University and Harvard Law School. Our Best Intentions is her first novel. Vibhuti lives with her husband in Johannesburg, South Africa, where she works in international development finance. Beatriz Williams, in conversation this evening, is the best-selling author of 13 novels, including Her Last Flight, Summer Wives, and The Golden Hour. She graduated from Stanford University and earned an MBA in finance from Columbia University. She's a friend of the bookstore. I'd even say a best friend from many people have reported.
You can catch me wandering around the stacks.
Yeah. With these two brilliant minds and their backgrounds, we could probably have a conversation about a number of things tonight, but we're going to talk about books. And here to tell us more about Our Best Intentions, Beatriz Williams and Vibhuti Jain.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Beatriz. I finished this book last night, and oh my god! So I was just we hadn't met for a little, a little wine and a snack beforehand, and I was telling Viv, in the nature of the business, you have to read a lot of books that you wouldn't necessarily want to read and have to slog through a lot of books that you wouldn't necessarily want to slog through. This book was amazing. I was like, and I'm on deadline right now, so I need sleep, but I was like, still trying to one more. I need to sleep, one more chapter, like the last few nights. So this book is so good. It is that rare book that is both propulsive storytelling, where you are turning the pages, but there's also so much there. We literally have about 5 hours worth of conversation we can have about this book. We will have to condense it down, but I am just going to turn it over to Viv now to just describe, the book and kind of how you came to it, and then she'll give a brief reading, and we will get to the Q&A.
Great, thank you. So Our Best Intentions is a story about a working class Indian American immigrant family who live in an affluent suburb of New York City and get entangled in a criminal investigation. And the story is really about the fallout from this crime that happens in their formerly harmonious community, and how they're forced to confront a lot of uncomfortable social questions about race, about class. And sorry, if you can't hear me, I will try to speak up. I've been told I need to project more.
I have 4 kids, so this is not a problem. As soon as yours get a little older, within like yelling years, you'll develop the voice.
And are forced to confront uncomfortable questions about race, about class, about what it means to do the right thing. What it means to fit in, and then also their own emotional baggage and how they understand and relate to one another. The story came about, I was telling you this prior to this event. The story actually was inspired by a conversation I had with an Uber driver. So I live in South Africa, and I was visiting my parents a few years ago, and I was on my way back from JFK going to Stamford, Connecticut. And I had a really interesting conversation with an Uber driver about how in the affluent Westchester suburb where his children go to school, there had been a series of violent incidents. And I remember being really surprised because I thought that town was really nice. And, he was telling me about how the community was responding and how the parents in the community were worried about the decline of this town. And I remember being really struck by how easy it was for us to talk about access to public schools, and how it, almost taking it for granted that if you are able to afford a nicer house and pay more in property taxes, you have access to a nicer school. And then, kind of as the conversation went on, I was really intrigued, and we were both, two people of Indian American descent, and we were, he was kind of talking to me very openly in a way that sort of treated us, people of color, as if we weren't minorities. And I remember just really being puzzled by that, and it just making me think a lot about what is the place of Indian Americans in dialogues about race and class. And so the plot kind of took shape from there. In the story that I wrote, there's a crime that occurs in a fancy town, and the way I imagined it, it's centered around an Indian American family. And so that was really the inspiration for the book. The father in the novel happens to be an Uber driver. And so, yeah, I think I had a lot of fun writing it. It's my first book. I didn't know that I was actually going to be able to write a whole book. And so it was really a fun sort of challenge to myself.
And I have to say that you would not believe this is a debut novel. It is so polished. It is so just technically proficient that it was a joy to read, but also I was sort of in awe of the level of craft that you brought to this book. Not just the sort of the quality of the writing, but just the quality of the narrative structure and how you bring all these issues to the forefront without in any way making it seem like any kind of a lecture on class and race. It is so complex and so beautifully told. So you were going to read from chapter 3, and so I will just hand the book over to you and let you get going.
Thank you. So chapter 3 is one of the early chapters in the book where we meet the character of the father, Babur Singh. The book is told through multiple perspectives, and so this is sort of the first chapter where we get background on this character. So chapter 3. Babur Singh's life is finally falling into place. It's the third Wednesday in August, a mild 78 degrees with a tepid breeze and mostly cloudless sky. The radio blares an infectious pop song about Havana that he can't help but hum and drum his fingers along to. His left forearm and elbow rest against the edge of the open window of his red Prius, and the dark hair on his arms flutters as he navigates midday traffic along the parkway. The day feels ripe with promise and good fortune. Babur, or Bobby as most know him, is the sole proprietor and founder of Move with Bobby Transport LLC. The company, and consequently Babur, is having a record summer. Business is booming in spite of the surging popularity of various on-demand transportation applications, each seeking a non-negligible commission from drivers for use of their respective platforms. In fact, Babur is en route from LaGuardia, where he dropped off two of his regulars, the Burnett Johnsons, a multiracial gay couple, both of whom, quote, work in finance and, quote, in the city, to catch a flight up to Cape Cod for the weekend. They had tipped with abandon, $40 on a $100 ride. Some people have money to burn. Babur couldn't help but feel judgmental, notwithstanding his pocketing a generous sum without complaint and with a toothy curbside drop-off and farewell. He does not sacrifice quality customer service on account of others' fiscal irresponsibility. He drives north on the parkway in the direction of the exit for Route 15 and smiles, genuinely this time, as he heads to his next destination, the township of Kitchewan. The Singhs moved to Kitchewan over a decade ago, back when Purnima was still around, and Angela, then Anjali, had been in preschool. Babur remembers tripping over the peculiar town name, unversed at the time with the ubiquitous commemoration of the area's native inhabitants, who were, so far as Babur could tell, no longer around to enjoy the honor. Great schools, upscale people, and gorgeous river views. Kitchewan is where you want to be, their broker had told them, nodding with approval at the upwardly mobile young family. An earnest, clean-shaven husband, a company man, a product ambassador, aka salesman, for a biomedical supply company, a formerly slim but softer post-baby wife, who nodded agreeably, if not bashfully, as she allowed her husband to do the talking, and an energetic young child with skin the color of burnt sugar and wispy curls of brown-black hair as fine as bird feathers, weaving in and out of her parents' legs. It turns out, 10+ years later, after one intra-town move and one sing lighter, it was. Babur hums a little louder to the music, decelerating as he approaches a sharp curve. He revels in a favorite pastime, running through his well-crafted daily itinerary in his head. Every task and appointment is already meticulously documented in his daily planner, but Barbara relishes admiring the tidiness and order of it all, finding serenity and purpose in playing back from memory his choreographed life. He plans to spend this afternoon in his home office, a modest but scrupulously maintained ground floor study. He will station himself on his swivel chair before his desktop computer at his particulate board desk, natural wood being out of budget, and who can tell the difference really, adjacent to a wood composite bookshelf that doubles as a display case, mostly for his daughter's swimming accolades. Fortified by a toasted tomato sandwich and mug of milky black tea, he'll check his email and business Facebook page for passenger requests, and then conduct a mid-afternoon status check on his other cars, or more accurately, his other drivers. There is, Bobber has concluded, despite advice to the contrary from his voluminous collection of business-focused self-help books on the bookshelf next to him, Entrepreneurship for Dummies, From Good to Great, 5-Star Boss, no management too micro when managing people who work for one's own business. After that, Bobber will tabulate his business accounts for the month to date, an exercise he does both mid-month and at month's end to keep a real-time pulse on performance. While it's been a bumper summer, he can't take his foot off the proverbial gas. Not now, with an almost college-bound daughter, and not in Kitchewan, where any success short of being a Fortune 500 executive, or, say, a hedge fund boss, like his daughter's friend's father, is considered modest. Bobber approaches the stretch of the parkway that runs parallel to the Hudson River. In his peripheral vision, he sees the surface of the water glittering in the afternoon light. He lets out a contented sigh, even as traffic congestion builds in front of him. Bodies of water remind him of Angie. She must be training now, he thinks, scanning his car clock and also his phone, which is affixed to his dashboard, to see if she's texted him back in response to an earlier message she'd sent about dinner. She hasn't. She's probably in the pool. Ever since she was in the first grade, when Bobber enrolled her in swimming classes at the community center as a substitute for after-school care, Angie has swum more days than not. She has trained for the better part of the year, every year since middle school. But this summer, she's dedicated herself with such focus that even Bobber, who believes he knows his child better than anyone else in the world, is taken aback by the singular drive of his outwardly understated offspring. Seeing her grit, he agonizes, mostly in the middle of the night when he has trouble sleeping, because his mind seems to never turn off, over whether there is in fact a way to enroll Angie in one of the notable year-round swim clubs she has her heart set on joining. Can he cut back his weekend hours and adjust his weekday hours so he can drive her to meets and back and forth from early morning and evening practices? But try as he might, boom summer or not, they cannot afford it. He tries not to panic about it in front of her, assuring her that using the high school pool and emailing with the school coach is as good as a club, but he knows it isn't. And Angie will eventually need better to reach the true heights of her potential. Bobber's phone buzzes and the car in front of him brakes in the same instant. As his eyes flash to the phone screen, a text from a client confirming a pickup at White Plains Airport tonight, he delays applying his brakes and ends up sharply jolting to a halt. A paperback copy of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man that had been resting on the passenger seat falls to the floor of the car. Bobber winces. It's a bad omen for a book to touch the floor. He's been reading Angie's summer books for her advanced English class along with her to help her edit the reaction essays she has to write. He's not quite sure how helpful he's been. Her school is a stark contrast to the open-air government school of his childhood in Hoshiarpur, where English literature study consisted of perfunctory ensemble chants of fire, burn, and cauldron bubble, and Juliet is the sun, in response to the schoolma'am's expectant double, double, toil and trouble, and it is the East, but he enjoyed the idea of his otherwise independent daughter meeting him, and his glimpse of an American education. The traffic is at a standstill, so Bobber unbuckles his seatbelt and reaches for the misleadingly titled book, Not a Tale of Optical Illusion and Superheroics, placing it back on the seat after touching it to his forehead. He rebuckles and hopes the karmic equivalent of the 5-second rule applies. Traffic recommences and he turns up the radio, nodding his head to a slightly crude pop song purporting to share rules for communicating with one's ex-lover. He hopes Angie doesn't start dating until after she leaves for college, and that she is able to solicit the guidance she may need in this arena from her professors. He's not equipped to parent his daughter through interactions with the opposite sex. His own experience limited to his tumultuous time with Purnima. Also, unlike other topics that he's uncomfortable navigating, like menstruation and bra shopping, he isn't sure he can outsource this one to their sympathetic neighbor, Colleen Sullivan, one of several women advisors whom Bobber has enlisted over the years to help fill the void of Purnima's abandoned duties. For example, when Angie was 11, Colleen took her to buy her first training bra, using this occasion, her Bobber's insistence, to speak woman to be about Angela's changing body. A great relief to Bobber, even if his daughter seemed less than pleased. Better to learn of such things from another female than from Bobber paraphrasing excerpts from Our Bodies Ourselves. But after Colleen's 4th of July barbecue last month and her not so subtle invitations in the event Bobby gets lonely, he's too embarrassed and frightened to re-enlist her to chat with Angie about dating. Fortunately for Bobber, the subject doesn't yet appear to be on Angie's mind. The closest he and his daughter have come to speaking about relationships was a surprising recent ultimatum that Angie issued when he was researching university swimming programs. As a condition to her leaving home for college, Angie has made her father promise that he will find someone or something outside of work, so he won't be all alone. Children these days are so emotionally complex, Bobber remembers thinking, feeling guilty that Angie worries about him. He's also caught off guard by her pointed emphasis on someone. The idea of someone after 8.5 years of no one other than himself and Angie burns Bobber's ears. It is out of the question, not a chance that he's ready or has time, or even with time interest. He has Angie to take care of. He's both father and mother to the girl, and it's his obligation, his sacrosanct duty, to ensure she reaches every pinnacle of success. First back to regionals, then to state, then All-American, and then he inhales sharply, stopping himself. No use in tempting fate. No, he thinks. He does not have time for barbecues and picnics and whatever else, he blushes, Colleen Sullivan has in mind. Besides, under the laws of the state of New York, he and Purnima are still legally married. And although he owes Purnima nothing, not even, he thinks, clenching the steering wheel, a response to her latest audacious email, he won't, he shouldn't, for his own sake, and Angie's, introduce unpredictability into their diarized lives, especially when he's dedicated the last 8.5 years to eliminating just that, especially when things are going well. He'll tell Angie that he'll take up an activity at the community center, a photography class maybe, he thinks, as his eyes flicker back to the shimmering river on his right. Bobber's thoughts are interrupted by his phone, ringing through his car's Bluetooth. He adjusts his headset and sits more upright, removing his arm from the window ledge before he answers. Hello, Move with Bobby. This is Bobby speaking. His standard greeting. Technically speaking, there's a transport at the end of the business's name to avoid, upon the advice of counsel, confusion with a personal training company in Fairfield. But colloquially, it's Move with Bobby. And around the house or in Bobber's day planner, Move. Hi, Mr. Babar, please. Bobber cringes at the butchering of his first name. It's a woman's voice, not someone he immediately recognizes. This is he. I go by Bobby. Mr. Bobby? This is Mabel Burrows, Principal Burrows of Kitchewan High School. Principal Burrows? Is everything okay? I'm so sorry to bother you, Mr. Bobby, but are you driving, Mr. Singh? I am, yes, but it's no problem, Madam Principal. The school year hasn't even begun, and I see they've already got you on the clock. He lets out an artificial chuckle. The principal doesn't reciprocate. Mr. Singh, I'm calling about Angela. Bobber's heart stops. She's fine, let me say that up front. His heartbeat resumes, but with gusto. But there's been an incident at the high school. What kind of incident? Is she hurt? No, nothing like that. She's not hurt and she's safe. She pauses. I'd rather not say more on the phone. I think it will be best if you drive here. Can you make your way over to the high school? Bobber checks his clock. It's 2:54 p.m. Give me 10 minutes. Great, I'll see you soon. She hangs up. Bobber immediately calls his daughter. After a few rings, the call goes to voicemail. This is Angela. I can't talk right now and I don't check my messages. If it's important, text me. Bobber ignores the instructions and leaves a voicemail. Angela, this is Dad. I'm on my way. He hesitates, trying to decide if he should give her some advice, like stay safe or don't move. Settling on, I'll see you soon, and hangs up. He tucks the invisible man farther away from the edge of the car seat, turns off the radio, pushes his shoulder blades back, sits at attention, leaning ever so slightly into the steering wheel, and drives.
So that sets in motion all the all the events and the pace at which this drama unfolds, and how and when you find out about particulars of what happened that morning at the school are really, I think, expertly done. We'll keep you glued to the page, but there's just so much in there to discuss. I want to start with the characters, because I think that is such a strength of this book. I mean, as you can, I'm sure you understood from the chapter, Viv is so good at drawing a character. We talk a lot about showing, not telling. We know who Bobby is just from that chapter, what he's like, just from everything he's doing and saying, the way he's thinking. And we get to see this story from the viewpoints of several different characters, all of which are equally well drawn and so different and so rich. And there's not a stock character in the book. So my first question is, how do you, and we're talking teenagers, and she captures everything so well, and different types of teenagers. How did you, first of all, how did you slip inside these characters and bring them to life so well? And secondly, were there certain characters that were more of a challenge to you than others?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, I mean, for me, the fun part about, I think the fun part about this plot was I was really interested in how, we as people often meet people that we disagree with, or who do things, take actions that we don't like. And we think, I'm so different than that person. There is nothing I have in common with them. I can't imagine, how I would relate to them. And I think for me, what I wanted to do when I wrote this and thinking about this plot was really think about the different perspectives to a situation, and how, if you really boil down what we all want out of life, oftentimes our motivations are more similar than they are dissimilar. I mean, we all just want to better our lives. We all just want to, do right by ourselves and by our loved ones. And I think, so, kind of with that in mind, I knew I wanted to write from multiple perspectives, and I just really kept that in mind. I really thought about what makes this person tick. And I think for most of the characters in the book, there's this base desire to just do right by themselves and by their loved ones. And the actions they take might veer them down very different paths than, you or I may agree with. But I think that's how I thought about it. And yeah, it's not that different, whether someone's a teenager or whether someone's an adult.
There were so many different perspectives here. And so, and people from across the spectrum of class, of race, of education, all of these things. And I think one of the things that you really kind of bring out so well is we have the person who is the young woman who is accused of this crime, who is Black. She's from troubled background. Her housing status is not clear. Her family status, or even her right to be at the school isn't clear. We have the working class Singh family who don't associate themselves so much with that sense of being a minority and being, and having that sort of, history of a sense of oppression. And then we have our wealthy, well-educated suburban finance executives who have a sort of a different perspective on all that. So I think I want to talk a little bit first about this whole idea of minorities and sense of belonging that you bring out so well in this, and the sense for the Sings that, you know, all they want to do, they're changing their names, they're wanting to fit in. So how did you sort of bring out, and how did you, I guess, tackle this issue of, you know, being a model minority versus being, you know, a more troubled minority? How did you kind of bring that out and handle that in a very sensitive and well-balanced way, and just the different perspectives involved?
I mean, I think part of it is just when you grow up as a person of, you know, Asian background in the US, it's just part of your reality. I think it's really sad that in the US you have sort of this feeling that in order to succeed, you need to align yourself with being closer to whiteness. And I think you see a lot of that from the Sings. They live in a pretty homogenous town, and they think their path to success is to blend in. I think, you know, I think growing up, I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, not too far from here. And I think it is tough. I mean, I think when you have a name that's hard to pronounce, when you look different than everyone else, you feel like, okay, well, if the way to fit in is to try to be, the way to sort of be relatable to other people is surely to just fit in. And I think I brought that sentiment when I was writing how both Bobby and his daughter feel.
And you also brought, I thought, you know, was really sort of well done as well, was the perspective of the Black characters in the book, which, you know, was, you know, the perspective there felt so real and so thoroughly imagined that I think just having that different perspective was just so essential to the book, and understanding why the reactions of different parts of the community are the way they are. I think one of the great strengths is your portrayal of the teenagers involved, which I was like, as a mom with teenagers, I'm like, how does she remember this from her own like teenagerhood, or how does she have this incredible insight into the teenage brain, which and in particular, you know, we see social media playing a role and all these pressures that they're you know, that they are facing. So what was it like? How did you sort of bring your teenagers to life because I feel like teenagers now have a completely different set of givens that we had when we were going through that same life stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think with all of my characters, no matter their age, I mean, I think even teenagers, you know, have sort of the same motivations, the same fears, the same anxieties that we do as adults. They're just kind of heightened because you have this added feeling of not knowing who you are. And I think anyone who's ever been an adolescent girl can understand being self-conscious, just wanting to fit in, just wanting to like, you know, second guessing everything they're doing, not really understanding how to speak up for themselves. And I think for me, writing with a little bit of distance as an adult makes it easier to just think back on how different that experience was. I think for the other teenage characters, I think a lot of it is just, I have a very active imagination. And I think that's the fun part of writing. You just kind of get to pretend you are different people. And that was the best part about writing this for me, I think.
There are no, it's not a book of heroes and villains, which is, I think, to me, the really rich part. What would you say was sort of the most difficult aspect of this to write about, the most difficult character to write about? Who did you have the least sympathy? And I guess we should have maybe a little bit more perspective. So, you know, we have Angie, she's a swimmer, and she is very focused on swimming and on sort of making to the next level, both in her swimming career and her education. We have the McClearys, Sam, they're very wealthy, and Henry and Sam. Henry is the older brother, right? Yes, older brother, and his, you know, his father is a hedge fund manager. It's sort of like this picture perfect family, which we discover is not quite so picture perfect. Sam is a very good friend to Angie, probably her best friend. but it's a bit of a troubled relationship. And then we have Chris, who is Henry's friend, and who is also present at the time that the crime is committed. It comes in the beginning, so Henry is stabbed, not to, it's not really a spoiler, that happens very early on. Chris is there, the other person present, is a young Black woman who, again, is of uncertain housing status. We don't know much about her. We sort of, that is all comes out as the book goes along. And she is, of course, I say, of course, accused of this crime. So these are kind of our main players going on here. So which of these characters, and I know there was one for me that was like the least sympathetic. I was literally sort of heart pounding a little bit because I was like, what is in this person's head? But you tell me which, how did you, in this kind of cast of characters, which was, I guess, what aspect of the story was the most difficult for you to tackle?
So the hardest part about the book for me to write was the ending. And I won't give it away, but I will say I really struggled with I wanted the book to be very realistic. As you said, there are no heroes, there are no villains, and I didn't want to tie up every single loose end. And I felt a lot of, so I'd kind of gone the opposite direction initially, where I was like, I just wanted to end like how things end in real life. There is no ending, it just kind of fades away. But I think that was very dissatisfying. And so I had to go back to that a number of times and decide what I wanted to resolve. And a big part of that was actually thinking about the character of this girl, Kiara, who is not welcome in this town and accused of this crime. And I had a lot of trouble thinking about how to portray her character in a way that didn't objectify her, that didn't make her a symbol for all things tragic, that gave her agency and that gave her personality and voice, but wasn't, it wasn't dehumanizing. I think that was probably the hardest.
Yeah, because she doesn't feel like a martyr. I mean, she's troubled, but she's also made some bad choices. So it's a very complicated situation that these kids are facing together. There is one aspect of the book that was difficult is the privilege wielded by the McClearys. The lawyer is involved from the very beginning. He wants to kind of strong arm the Singhs into kind of going along with a narrative that paints, the McClearys in the best light. So how did you kind of deal with that in the book? How did you, why did you feel this was an important part of the story to bring out?
I think it's really interesting how we perceive truth. And I think a lot of that has to do with whose voice gets heard. And I think they have access to resources. And so they get to sort of tell their story first and have it amplified. And I think we see that a lot in our society in just so many different ways, whether it's through social media or whether it's through, people who are sort of the gatekeepers for different professions. I mean, I think in many ways, I think the McClearys sort of get to define that they get to be the baseline for what happened. And that's how I kind of thought about it when I was writing them.
Family is actually a very important theme throughout the book, and we see families in all kinds of different situations and backgrounds. One, common theme is abandonment by a parent and the effect that has on kids. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess the family that I depict in this book is not traditional in the sense that the mother actually leaves and walks out. And I think I've just been very intrigued by the ideas we have in society about motherhood and how it's just so much more common for us as, in our culture to forgive a father who maybe leaves and then reconnects with his family many years later, maybe reconnects with his children, but we don't really see that same level of forgiveness for a mother. There's just very different very different expectations. I actually wrote this before becoming a mother, and so I don't know how that would have changed my perspectives on some of this, but I think I was just really intrigued by kind of wanting to show that sort of ostracized family structure.
With the scene where Bobby describes, I guess the stages by which his wife, she clearly has postpartum depression. It was an arranged marriage. She has postpartum depression. There are a number of reasons why she's clearly desperately unhappy. But we see this through his perspective, and it's so brilliantly done. I say this as a writer because to tell this story from the perspective of somebody who does not necessarily feel sympathetic about it, yet draw the reader into sympathy with Angie's mother, was just so beautifully done. I was practically in tears, like, it's like, no, like wanting to sort of tell him what was really going on. But of course, I feel like he just doesn't know women like at all.
I think part of it is he didn't understand her. But I think part of it is also just the reality of being maybe a first generation American, where you need to put your head down and you need to provide for your family financially. And that's what he thought he was doing. And you see that a lot with his parenting style. He wants to make sure his daughter is well fed. He wants to make sure she's slept enough. He wants to make sure she's attending school. But he's not able to be there for her emotionally. And I think the same was true with his wife. He was so focused on, okay, we need to earn this much every month to, meet our budget, that he wasn't able to, be there for her emotionally, or even have the vocabulary to
Understand it. Yeah. It's so, there's this book is so impactful, these wonderful details. One of my favorite details is the way Bobby gets a schedule together where each day of the week they have a meal. So like, Wednesday is like spaghetti night, and like Monday is whatever, and so like and then Andy's sort of like, I didn't realize until later in life that this was a little bit weird to have like Wednesday always be spaghetti and Thursday always be, whatever. But she's, on the other hand, it's kind of comforting to know what day you're going to get which food. And I thought that was just such a wonderful detail. We also have, the interesting thing was we also have a character, Chris, whose father abandoned him. So we have that sort of and it affects them both so differently. But to me, one of the most moving passages where Angie is hearing her mother's voice, and her mother, even in, it's obviously her imagination, it's a voice, but it's like she herself was trying to fill this void that her mother has left in her life. So it's just so well done. There's one more thing, actually there are so many more things that I wanted to touch on. Let's see. We talked about, so one thing that was interesting to me, and I guess this is more big picture, so it's a good thing to end on, because I think we're heading to Q&A, to audience questions, but this whole, and I think you touched on this, where at the end of the day, it's not like, say, the McClearys with their privilege are villains. I think that if you sat down with the McClearys, they would certainly say things that, that they believe in, diversity, equity, inclusion. But when you're talking about my kids, you get very territorial. And, it kind of comes down to, I am, in every other way progressive, but on the other hand, I don't like anything that's going to affect my kids' education and their chances in life. And we see this like with the college skin, we're very progressive people. We're also paying and cheating to have their kid jump the queue to get into a selective school ahead of people with less advantages. So maybe talk to that a little bit. I mean, I know we've already kind of touched on that a little bit, but to me, that's kind of like the big takeaway from the book.
You said it better than I do. I mean, absolutely. I think about this a lot. I think about how we, often want to describe ourselves as progressive, as open-minded, but as soon as we feel threatened or challenged, we retreat into sort of a narrow-minded worldview where it's me versus you, and we're quick to make judgments or assumptions about people, or to kind of cut corners or cut the line because it's better for, we think it's better for us. And I think we see that time and again, and it's not just with one particular group of people, but and I think that's one of the interesting things I think sometimes about culture in the Northeast. I think a lot of people, myself included, would probably describe ourselves as open-minded, progressive, but but
all of these
exactly,
things, yeah.
but you know, in the book, there's this like kind of touching on this performative aspect of
Mhm.
protesting and
yeah.
standing up for a cause. Yeah, I guess, I think, I hope it maybe reading this maybe encourages us to think a little bit deeper about how much do we actually know about things we say we stand for, and what does it mean to actually like support something non-superficially.
There was the term on that note. There was the term, I think towards the end, the term used kind of in an accusatory fashion, a limousine liberal was something that I had never actually heard before, but kind of made me laugh. And then also, oh, that doesn't sound good at all. Yeah. Would you like to take a few questions from the audience?
Yes.
Yeah. Any questions that you'd like to ask our author, Viv? I can start off with one. You guys think of some questions? Having written your first book and seeing it now out in the world, published just recently, do you want to write another one?
Yes, absolutely. I'm working on my second one. It's a little harder, but it's harder because I think the first book I was just sort of doing as a hobby in many ways. I didn't know that I was actually going to finish a book. I was writing for fun. I was writing as a challenge to myself, and now I think, you know, I have expectations, and yeah, we'll see. But yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
How long did it take you to write this?
So I wrote the first draft in about, so it was kind of a nights and weekends project for me, and I wrote the first draft in about 9 months. And then I did a lot of revision. I didn't realize, and you probably know this very well, that revising is actually a lot harder than writing the first draft. That took like over a year.
Great questions. Yeah. Any other questions from the audience?
Who gave you suggestions to revise? Like, did you, like, at what point do you say somebody else read this?
Oh, I absolutely relied on my friends. I have a friend who also happens to be a writing professor who was probably my savior in writing this, because I don't know that I, as a person who wrote it, had enough objectivity to actually know what I needed to rework. And also revising is just, it's a pain. It's not as exciting as like writing a first draft. You don't want to redo something that you did. You don't want to cut it. So yeah, I had a few friends who were my like beta readers.
Great questions. Yeah. I feel like Beatriz mentioned, like there's a book where you read the description, you're like, you have an idea what you're getting, and then there's so much more. Also, so many characters, so many themes, so much. Like you said, we could spend a couple hours probably talking tonight, but we want to move to the signing, the meeting our authors, our writers. We have copies of Our Best Intentions at the register just on the other side of the wall. You're welcome to purchase, and then we'll have a signing line. We also have copies of several of Beatriz's books also. And would you be up to signing also?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
excellent.
yeah.
So
I have bookmarks in the upcoming book, ready to go, so.
everybody, please let's give it. Thank you.